All right. Oh, it's so great to see so many people here today. Good morning. My name is Mara Mincer, and I'm the Executive Director of Growing Up Boulder, Boulder's Child and Youth-Friendly City Initiative, and I am so happy to welcome you to Participatory Planning with Young People for Museum Professionals. And I'll be joined by a few wonderful colleagues today who will all be introducing themselves. And I would say that today is a collaboration between my organization, Growing Up Boulder, and the Clyfford Still Museum. So, well, this is a bit of the agenda today. And before we even review this, I want to encourage you to take care of your needs. Whatever your bio needs are today, please make yourself comfortable so you can be engaged and it feels good to you. We will be doing some introductions, as I said, and then talking about the basic idea of why do we even want to engage young people? Why does that matter? We'll then talk about these 6 principles for youth engagement that Growing Up Boulder has developed over our 13-year history. And we'll actually have some interactive activities. So this is not just one of those presentations where you don't get to participate. We actually will want to hear from you, and that should be a lot of fun. And then finally, we're going to hear from the Clyfford Still Museum and really understand how they've applied these principles in their own setting in the most remarkable way I've seen in a long time. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So let us move to the next slide. So to tell you a little bit more about who will be talking to you today. Again, my name is Mara Mincer, and I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Growing Up Boulder. And I'm also a UNICEF USA Child-Friendly Cities Advisor. I'll explain a little bit more about what all of that means momentarily. And I have my colleague here, Darren Wagner. So you can see her on the screen. And Darren is both a facilitator and a planner by training. She has 2 master's degrees, one in in planning and the other in landscape architecture. And she has worked with the Park Service and our Open Space and Mountain Parks City Department for much of her career and has always engaged young people and recently joined Growing Up Boulder to be part of our team. So let me tell you a little bit about where we come to you from and who Growing Up Boulder is. As I said, we're Boulder's child and youth-friendly city initiative, and our vision is to use a participatory approach with young people and to lead a global movement in child-friendly cities that result in more equitable and sustainable communities for everyone. Our mission is to empower young people with opportunities for inclusion, influence, and deliberation on local issues which affect their lives. And we do that, we are a nonprofit based out of our fiscal sponsor, CNDC, Colorado Nonprofit Development Center. But we do that in collaboration with the University of Colorado, with our local school district, with our city, and then with over 50 different partner organizations and agencies throughout our community and even globally. Next slide. So to take a step back, how did we get here? What is the work that we do? And this actually informs really all of the work we'll talk about today. There is a treaty called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It was ratified in 1989 by all countries except for the United States. And it says that anyone under the age of 18 has specific human rights, including the right to a voice in decisions which affect your own lives. And so a lot of what you'll be seeing today is the embodiment of what does it look like when young people actually can influence the communities in which they live and be active participants in those communities. And that is the foundation upon which Growing Up Boulder was founded. So because of this, our program really operates at the intersection of so many different areas, from positive youth development to early childhood development. We do civic engagement and democracy, but at the same time, we're looking at what does resilience and sustainability look like. And so really, it's sometimes hard to define us because it's a very holistic approach, which is what I love about the work that we do. Next slide, please. We were founded in 2009, and we work with young people ages 0 through 18. And as you'll see today from the Clyfford Still perspective, there's plenty of work to be done by very young children. You don't have to be 17 or 18 to have a voice and to really share. And our young people are mentored by university students. During our tenure, we've engaged more than 7,000 young people on more than 100 local projects. And because we know that young people from historically marginalized backgrounds have even less opportunity to be heard within systems, we ensure that 50% or more of our young people are from those historically marginalized groups. We've also reached 2.5 million people globally, both through my TED Talk and also through our books and articles and podcasts and lectures. And then finally, we're proud of designing the country's first child-friendly city map with 700 kids and families. Okay, next slide. I'm going to let our Clyfford Still partners, museum partners, introduce themselves.
Thanks, Maura. We are just so thrilled to be working with you all, and we just feel so lucky to have an organization like yours right next door to us in Boulder. So thank you for joining us for this presentation and partnering with us on this. My name is Nicole Cromartie, and I'm the Director of Education and Programs at the Clyfford Still Museum in Denver, Colorado. I had the privilege of first visiting a museum when I was a young child. I'm now 15 years into my journey as a museum educator, and I believe that collaboration with our community is the key to understanding how we can make museums and cultural organizations meaningful, accessible, inclusive, and enjoyable for all.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm Bailey Plachek. I'm the Associate Curator at the Clyfford Still Museum and Co-Curator of Clifford Still Art and the Young Mind. I've been at the museum for 11 years now and am passionate about sharing Still's art with wide and diverse audiences in accessible ways to emphasize the unifying power of art and abstraction. So before we get too far into our presentation, I'd like to provide just a quick overview background on Clyfford Still and the museum as context for a project that Nicole and I will dig into a little bit later. Still was an American abstract expressionist artist, best known for his huge canvases filled with jagged fields of color. When he died in 1980, he left a will bequeathing about 93% of everything he ever created to an American city that would agree to build a museum dedicated exclusively to his art. His widow, Patricia, selected Denver, Colorado to receive the collection in 2004. The museum opened in downtown Denver in 2011, and since then we've been working hard to find new, exciting ways to present our single artist collection to the community.
Okay, thank you very much, Bailey and Nicole. Well, for our learning objectives today, here's the journey we're going to take you through. First, we want you to be able to participate and appreciate the value of engaging young people in decisions that impact them. And we hope you'll walk away with proven concrete techniques that allow even the youngest, and we mean youngest, and more vulnerable of our voices to participate in a meaningful way. We also will have you experience fun hands-on demonstrations, and hopefully you will leave inspired to apply them. So let's go back to the central question of why we're doing this. Why does listening to young people matter in the first place? Next slide, please. And this may be what you're worried about in your minds of, well, are they going to create candy cane style parks that we can't actually build? And what are we going to do with crazy ideas? Next slide, please. I am here to bust that myth that kids' ideas are so crazy that you won't be able to use them. And actually, this slide was specifically requested by our partner at the city who said, I've seen this in action, I've seen this work, but this is what I hear from my colleagues. They're always concerned about this. So my response is that children's feedback is often not that different from adults in that there are some ideas that you can do, there are some that you can't do, but they're heartfelt, and there are ways of actually taking those ideas, especially if they do seem outlandish, and looking for underlying themes. So in this picture, in this example, if you hear a request for skydiving and trampolines, which is a request I've heard from some 11-year-olds, what I understand is they want a little bit of risk taking in their parks. They want that feeling of adrenaline you get in your stomach. And so our job as planners or as the adults in their lives that are partnering with them is to figure out, how can I implement that? What is doable? And actually, I have seen small trampolines throughout parks and public spaces all throughout Europe. So trampolines actually are possible, I want to say. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some of the reasons that I think that young people's voices matter. First of all, kids are not just future citizens, which is true. We are training them for tomorrow's leadership, but they're current citizens. Just like my voice should matter in creating the community I live in, so should a young person. They are part of and using our spaces just as much as I am. A child-friendly environment is friendly to all ages and all people. So in fact, it's really friendly to senior citizens or an individual experiencing disabilities. If I am a parent trying to push a stroller on a sidewalk, that curb cut is going to help me push my stroller or help a kid on a skateboard as much as it might help someone using a walker or a wheelchair. And in fact, actually, child-friendly environments are species sensitive. They tend to be very environmentally friendly and good for the animals and plants in our neighborhood as well. It makes sense to include the end user in the design process. This image is from Vienna, Austria. And what happened was they decided that when they studied a local park, they saw that boys were using the park, but girls were not. And they started asking young girls, why aren't you not using the park? Well, what they found is that, for instance, in that that sort of contained ball space, they didn't feel safe in there. If they were in there playing basketball and they needed to escape quickly, there was only one entrance and exit, and it was very narrow. And so what the city of Vienna did was they listened to the young people. They created 2 entrances and exits. They widened them. And lo and behold, actually now it's used 50% by girls, 50% by boys. That change of listening to the community actually made a difference in how the space is used. Children designed for all ages. This is a project we did pairing senior citizens with kids. And what was remarkable is many of the ideas were the same. We were talking about a very hilly walking transit corridor. And we talked about, well, what could we do to make it more safe, comfortable, and fun to use? And both of them said, we need a bench halfway up that really steep hill to take a deep breath and sit. And then also, can we put some art nearby so it's enjoyable when we do that? And have some garbage cans too, because there was a lot of trash. Again, similar ideas. Next slide. Young people are more creative and flexible than adults. Now, while we adults obviously have many important ideas, children's brains are actually different than ours. They have not created the structures of connections that we have as much. And so they're actually able to think outside the box much more. And in fact, they've done studies that show that they can be better at problem solving than we are, because again, we're stuck in our frameworks, which have been very helpful when it comes to paying taxes and creating Excel spreadsheets, but maybe are not quite as helpful in terms of creativity. Next slide. Okay, so we wanted to hear from all of you, our audience, and find out, how would you rate your own organization's experience or readiness around this kind of child and youth engagement that I've just started to mention here? And it ranges from number 1, all the way from, we haven't thought about it, this is brand new to me, to we're really doing it well. And so the Zoom poll should pop up for everyone. And I encourage everybody to vote, and I'll wait maybe 30 seconds and see as the results come in. And I'll just say, while we're waiting for the results, I don't think you're ever done doing this work. There's always new ways. We're always learning. We've been doing this for 13 years, and every day I find amazing examples from the world, and I want to try them out in our community. And so that's part of the fun of this work. Okay, drum roll, please. May we see the results. Okay, so it really it's really quite a range here. And that makes sense to me. right? We're all in different developmental places. So great. Well, hopefully, no matter where you are on this, you will learn something today that takes you a little bit further towards number 5. And so now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Darren. Oh, actually, wait, this is me. Apologies. All right. So I'm going to talk about over the past 13 years, we actually have boiled down our work into having 6 key principles for youth engagement. And so really this came about by reflecting upon what are the common themes in our work and how can other communities use this. Next slide, please. So the first principle is to start with equity. And I love this image of the wheel of power and privilege created by Sylvia Duckworth originally. What it does is it looks at where are each of us. You can locate yourself on this and see where are you in terms of your access to power or historically being marginalized by the way our systems are set up in our community. And when we do our work, we try and go closest to the outside of this circle because we really want to elevate the voices of those who are least likely to be heard and least likely to access power. And we know that that benefits all of us when we actually listen to those voices. Having said that, we do try and hear from all young people because we recognize that most young people, no matter who they are, don't have an opportunity to participate in their community. Next slide, please. Okay, we try and meet young people where they are. And so I'm going to start by talking about this physically. What we will do is we'll actually come into classrooms, into spaces where young people are to hear their voices. And this came about from trial and error, because when we asked them to come to us, we had much lower participation rates. But when we went into their trusted spaces that felt comfortable and with trusted adults, we were able to hear from the kids and they were much more relaxed, unless we've really had time to work with them to train up to be in an adult-led space. Okay, next slide. So we also meet young people where they are metaphorically. We love when we are able to have our work led or co-led by people who reflect the background of youth. One time I had a grad student working with me from Turkey, and we were in a classroom where there was a young boy from Turkey as well. And his eyes lit up when he heard that she was Turkish and he could speak his home language. There was that real feeling of being seen and known when we reflect the backgrounds of our young people. We also want to let young people, we value their time and expertise. And so sometimes if we're asking them to work outside of the classroom on their own time, we will try and pay them and we will try and reward them for their time, just as you might with an adult. We also want to make sure that if we're working on really sensitive material, like the work we've been doing recently on helping young people heal from a mass shooting, unfortunately, in our community, we use a trauma-informed and healing-centered approach so that we're not re-traumatizing, but actually giving back to our young people and giving them skills that they can take with them. Okay, principle 3 is that we value young people's lived experiences, and we value their culture and language and skills and interest. And all of this is part of their assets. And so assets are, what are the things that you bring to the table already? What is great about you and your life? Because every single person has this, no matter how tough their life situation. And I will say that often in the past, especially in the nonprofit world, there was a deficit-based lens that people used of what's wrong with this family? What aren't they doing right? And so let's look at what this actually looks like. Okay, actually, so one of the examples here is we've had young people interview their own families about, especially it was a group of young people, many of whom came from immigrant backgrounds, to hear what their families loved about public spaces in their home countries. So this built on the knowledge and expertise of their elders who often don't have that opportunity to bring in their home countries and to also be seen as really experts. And so we were able to build upon those lived experiences. The next example there is a boy who was talking about his own life when we were doing transportation master planning. So we asked him to draw 3 places he visited regularly. One was his home, one was his school, and one was a place he would go out to visit. And how did he get from place to place? through this drawing activity, we were able to hear, okay, I take my bike to this place, but I can't get there unless I go by car to this other place. And then actually fed into our transportation master plan and their recommendations. This is how we've used culture, again, to highlight young people's assets. In Latin American culture, there's something called a nicho, which is often an altar or a recognition and an honoring of someone's elders or ancestors or values. So we took that idea and did it with 8-year-olds in their classroom. And so this on the right is a child's version of a nicho, where she was giving input to our civic area park. And she said she loves animals. She loves the food she has grown up with. And it was important for her to see herself and her family reflected in this space. And so while we can't have tigers in Boulder's civic area, we could create a space that allowed for more native animals to return to the space. And that's actually exactly what has happened. Okay, next slide. Okay, now this is Darren.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Darren Wagner. We'd love to take our first pause and make this interactive and engaging so that when you walk away by the end of our presentation, you have some experience already and some ideas ready to go. The way that we plan to do that is by putting ourselves through an exercise that you might then be able to deliver with young people going forward. So here's what we're asking of you. If you could, please take a moment, and sometimes this requires closing your eyes and just, having some quiet space to try and remember your earliest memories as it relates to having gone to a museum. This might be one memory that really stuck there. It might be a chain of memories. Try and think about how old you were and who were you with and what did you do, and try and pick one experience. The next part is to actually sketch. So yes, this does require a piece of paper of some kind, pencil, pen, marker, whatever you have. I want to stress that there are no bad artists and that we are not asking you to hang your work at the museum, for example. So this is really just an exercise. And then what we often do with young people is to ask them to label their drawings so that later, after the engagement, we can remember what it is that they were trying to draw, especially with younger ages when that might not be as apparent or representative. So I'd love to give you 5 minutes to carry out these 3 steps, and then we'll come back together and ask for some volunteers who are interested in sharing out, and we'll talk about the themes that we're all seeing. So I'm going to mute myself for the next few minutes and let you get to work.
I'm going to play some nice music to work by. And also, Nicole's putting in the chat too, if you somehow didn't visit a museum when you were a child, no worries. You can write about a park or a library and one of the first times you remember visiting that.
All right. So I would love to hear from some of you about what that felt like. And again, we really want to stress that there are no bad artists here. You are welcome, if you are interested, to unmute yourself and to hold your picture up to the camera if you'd like. If you'd rather just talk about it, you can do the same thing. And what we're interested in hearing is both what that felt like and anything that you were kind of envisioning or imagining as you're thinking about rolling this out with young people, but also the content that came out for you and what you were trying to draw and reflect in your work. Are there any participants who are excited and proud to share thoughts or their pictures? You are also welcome to share your thoughts in the chat as well. This is often what I love about what's happening now is this is something that you might experience yourselves if you're rolling this activity out. Sometimes it takes that very brave person to go first.
It looks like Sahira is holding up a drawing. Sahira, did you want to share?
Of course. The very first memory I have of a museum was on a school field trip. This is when I was like 9, but this was in Mexico because I was raised there. So I remember the building, and it was like a very bright pink color with some like nichos in there. And then there was like a big dove sculpture, although mine looks more like a duck. And the museum was wrapped around like a very important lake that stems back from the Conquer times. And then from the inside, what I remember was big, bright spaces. But what I will always, like, I will never forget that they were talking about like pre-Hispanic history, and they had like the pyramids of Teotihuacan, and they had like a miniature city. And I remember the T-shaped like doors, and they explained to us like why they were shaped like that, and kind of like the logistics of why the city was built like it. And then they had like a big copy of the Mayan calendar as well. And then they had like an explanation of the counting system that they had back there with bars and dots. So it just looking at the miniature thing, the miniature cities made me like kind of merge history and art, which later became like a big part of like who I am, because I love those things. And I always thank the museum experience, because like it was eye-opening to me of how much you can learn having fun and being with your friends. And yeah, every time I hear museums, like my mind goes back to this place. I even had like some photo shoot later in my quinceañera in this place because I loved it so much. So I work in the learning and engagement department here at the art museum. So that's what I picture every time I think about a meaningful experience. I wish all the children who visit us have the same impact, and they develop a love for art and culture like I did.
That's wonderful, Sahira. And I'm struck by a couple of themes that I'm hearing in there, even as they relate to some of the thoughts that we're seeing come in on the chat. Sharon, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Were you interested in sharing some of your experience?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm happy to share an experience. I didn't have a lot of early experiences with museums because I grew up in a place in Pennsylvania where we had a very limited number of museums in our area. But I remember going to Gettysburg with my mother and my brother, my family, when I was probably 7 or 8. And it was an independent kind of tour that you were taking. But what I think struck me was that it was all about a story about something that had happened a long time ago, and that these were all pieces of the story. And that for us, my mother was quite interested in finding some of the statues, sculptures of, previous generations who had been in the war. And so in that way, it became relevant to all of us because we were looking for someone who was family. So then I contrast that with another experience that I had with James Buchanan's home, which was in Lancaster. And again, at a not too different age, going there and realizing that there were different ways to tell stories beyond certainly the books that we read. But in Gettysburg was one way to tell a story. At the historic home was another way to tell a story. And they had a little bit more, because it was facilitated with docents, a few more experiences that were appealing to me as a young child. Now, I don't remember a lot about it. That was a long time ago. But I would say those are my early experiences. And it just, left an impression on me that there were some very interesting things to do and learn about, through places in the community or wherever. And that was before my childhood trip to the Smithsonian. So that was kind of it.
That's fantastic. And I'm even I'm hearing, you know, a somewhat similar age range. I think I heard you say you were 7 or 8, and Zahira, you were 9. So obviously some formative years and relationships with, you know, your own community and the history of your community. I'm seeing some additional thoughts in the chat. And what I'd like to point out is that, you know, as we know that working virtually has both its benefits and its drawbacks. And, you know, when you're doing a similar exercise like this with young people, and even honestly adults, because you can tell that it's fun for us and good to draw up memories, you ideally might be in person where you have a flip chart and you're, you know, taking notes and identifying themes as you go with the young people you're engaging. So I'd like to see if there are thoughts that the participants here have around any themes that you might be seeing or having heard from just even the couple of speakers who were speaking rather than also in the chat. Any thoughts that are emerging? Interactivity, I see from Nicole. Themes about space. Yep. Senses, that's what I was picking up on too. Some real tactile memories around color and three-dimensional statues and so on. Personal connections. Yep. Yeah, who lives in this castle? That's so sweet. You know, I think that is a really nice, yeah, and Mary, you put that well, awe. You know, I think there's so much, yeah, I heard even in Sahira, your first comment around, you remember the building, and I've seen other comments in the chat. You know, I remember the building or the space more. Also hits on how the full environment affects the experience of going to a museum. And this is lovely. And this is, again, the kind of activity that can draw out ideas for the future or improvements that young people are looking for. So let's see, I see a couple more chats coming in. And then we'll wrap this up and move on in just a few minutes. Color and awe. Yeah, colorful and shining stones. The sense of fascination or magical experiences, and lots of support for that. Plasma ball. Yep. So this is a fun activity, it really is. And it's something that we're obviously doing in a compressed time period now just to demonstrate the activity, but it's a rich one that as you're actually doing it, you could spend some real time with really teasing out these themes and talking about how you can use those themes to, again, make improvements going forward. Thank you so much for everyone sharing this. It really is fun to dig back into your childhood memories and try and imagine try and remember what it was like so that you can really engage effectively with young people today. Okay, let's draw this to a close and we'll go to the next slide. So I want to continue describing some of the principles that Mara started describing. And this next one really talks to the different ways that we all learn and obtain information and really retain information. And that looks a lot of different ways. There are visual learners, there are young people and adults who like to move as they're learning. There's so many different ways to engage that we try in our engagement practices to use a variety of methods so that we don't miss opportunities to hear from young people who might only really relate to one or two of those methods. Next slide. Thank you so much. Okay, so you know, again, as you know, we ourselves today are in an online environment. It's important to just recognize that, and you'll hear from Nicole and Bailey in a little bit about how effective online engagement can actually be. And it's, you know, we have a screenshot here on the left, for example, for some work that Mara has done working with a group, an existing community group that was already meeting, and she was able to engage with that group and join their forum to do some engagement with parents, for example. So it's really not as much of a barrier. We've learned a lot as a society in the last 2 years. There are opportunities to still engage online with young people and or their parents or guardians. And then also not to forget opportunities to meet outside. So this picture on the right is from an activity that was done on the site of an open space area adjacent to an elementary school. And we used opportunities to really, again, use those senses and to really talk about the real experience of being outside. So we wanted to make sure that we recognize the two major options that we have during the global pandemic. Next slide, please. And we also want to recognize that, depending on the setting in which you work, there are traditional methods that we are sometimes more versed with delivering, whether that's through questionnaires or focus groups or workshops or events. And sometimes it just takes some additional thought to adapt those methods in such a way that it feels more family friendly and engaging for young people and their families. And so on the next slide, for example, I take full credit for the graphic on the left, which was a version of trying to convey a lot of complex information. And it was okay. But on the right was a graphic that was developed by Growing Up Boulder staff to simplify that information for young people. And what we found was that it was far more effective for the adults as well. So even in a traditional setting, like a public meeting at which these materials were presented, make an extra effort to simplify the graphics and the information in such a way that it's accessible for all audiences. Next slide. Another way to adapt the engagement opportunities at a workshop is to also simplify the exercises themselves and how you're asking for the feedback. And so this is an example from a workshop where we specifically in people and their families, and we were asking complex questions, but the way we were asking for their feedback was pretty straightforward in the sense that we wanted to know the things that they liked and they wanted to keep. So please on the map, put a green dot next to that spot. What about the things that you might want to change, some things that, maybe aren't working or things that really aren't facilitating a full experience for children and their families. And then what about new ideas that you want to add to the conversation? Use a blue dot for those. So it's again, something that we were focused on adapting for children and families, but we found that altogether it was also far more effective and engaging for all ages. Next slide. So there are then also opportunities to really refocus the engagement on ways that are more targeted for the audience, for the young people that we're trying to engage, rather than adapting the adult style methods. And sometimes they are more tactile. We just heard those themes about, the senses, and that really resonates for young people as well. So we'll walk through some of these in the next few slides so you can get a sense of what those look like. Next slide. So one of the things that we feel has the most value is actually getting out on site. And in this case, it is outside. This was the study area. It could be inside a museum space, again, pending public health restrictions around the pandemic. But to get out in the space for which you're looking for feedback is some of the most powerful, you will get some of the most powerful feedback in that setting, because you can see here in this picture, the young people are touching and feeling and experiencing the texture and the color and the light in ways they just can't online. And so in the next slide, in the next couple slides, we'll walk through some ideas about what you can also do when you're out there on site. One of the easiest methods that is so universal and really so simple that you would take a piece of cardboard, cut out a frame, paint it green on one side, red on the other. You ask the young people to go around either with their own phones or cameras or with an adult who can take the picture for them, and to frame the things that they do and don't like, using the green for the good and the red for the bad. And it is really in this picture, you can sort of see how obvious the feedback is, in the sense that in this case, whereas before label their ideas. In this case, it's pretty self-explanatory. So the photo evidence that you end up with is easy to interpret after the fact as you're theming and developing the recommendations. Next slide. So another opportunity too is to watch the ways that young people engage in a space. And so sometimes it just means, you know, again, inviting them into the space that you're talking about or wanting feedback on, and just watching and seeing what they, how they use the space, what they do, who they sit next to, how they move around, what they gravitate towards. And it's also a way to build community, to just sort of let the young people be themselves in that space. You can then also, if you choose, maximize the participation by providing journals to let them draw or write about their experience there, and ask them to share verbally what it's like to be in that space. Next slide. So some other engagement methods that we also really enjoy using are around the arts themselves. And as we said earlier, there are no bad artists. There are only, the only limitations are the materials that we have to express them. And so whether that's through, you can see sort of on the left where it's almost a collage and selecting representative images of the ideas or the feelings or the people that you might want to see and experience in a space, is by creating your own sort of primary art through a model in the case on the right. This is it's really effective for a lot of ages, and provides, again, good evidence moving forward for demonstrating the kind of ideas that children and youth have. Next slide. So we also, this is another easy method that this can be done online, where we invite just visual preferences. And you'll hear from Bailey and Nicole about how this method was used to design the exhibit. It's showing a set of images and asking which you like better, rank them first, second, third, and tallying up the votes, so to speak, and getting feedback that way. It can be done in person with dots or online. Next slide. Another idea, and this is becoming easier and easier, is to ask young people, you know, sometimes of a certain age who are able to use the cameras or the phones, is to document their own experiences in the space that you're looking for feedback. We call this digital storytelling, or developing videos, or again, photographic evidence that helps you see, for example, how young people feel about a space. There's been a project that Growing Up Boulder has done in the past, for example, where GoPros were strapped on the preschoolers' heads as they moved through a particular transportation corridor, so that you could really start to understand what it's like to experience a space when you're only the height of a preschooler. Next slide. So here's another activity. We're going to take a pause, and this will be, we'll ask you to take a moment and think about it, and then to type your ideas into the chat. This is called a sentence stem, and this activity is common in the educational setting, and we have adapted and used it quite often in our own engagement. So just for the sake of illustration, our sentence stem is art is. So if you have ideas about what you think art is, I'm sure we'll hear a variety of ideas. Type them into the chat, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start envisioning a way we might even be able to link those ideas together into an amazing collective poem. Sounds kind of crazy, but it can actually be really beautiful. Have your idea of what art is, type the end of that sentence into the chat. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate this collective poem idea to you. And what I'm going to start by reading the first handful of responses to demonstrate how it builds into a poem. So art is life. Art is everywhere. Art is personal. Art is in everything and everywhere. Art is a great tool to express yourself and make your voice heard. Art is human expression made visible. And I could go on. This is I mean, it really would make an amazing poem, right? As this stacks on top of each other. And Growing Up Boulder has used this activity, for example, even the sentence stem was resilience is. And it really gives us chills every time we read the poem that is assembled at the end, because it's amazing how much creativity is really invited with this activity and the meaning that comes with the responses. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we have a couple more principles that I'll walk us through, and then we'll get to hear from Bailey and Nicole about the museum example. So one of the things we really stress from the beginning of any engagement process that you're gonna produce with young people is to make sure that you're transparent, both about the process, how you're gonna move through asking them a series of questions, and then what you're gonna do with the answers that you hear back. And it may like it'd be difficult to go through these conversations with young people, but we found it's quite the opposite. And unfortunately, in some ways, it's easy to underestimate what young people are actually very capable of understanding and internalizing. Next slide. So we have a set of questions that we really would encourage you to think through. And I do want to stress too that if you have been taking notes furiously along the way, we will send this PowerPoint out for participants on this training. So you will have these again, but I'm just going to read them now because they really are important. That before you start the engagement, you want to think about how you will share the decisions made and progress of the work back with the youth that you've worked with. You want to ask yourself, how do young people wish to receive that information? Do they want to hear it via snail mail or Instagram, text, email, website? Will you stay connected with the young people you're engaging, or is this a one-time engagement? And either is fine, but to be clear with yourself and those you're engaging is important. Is there another opportunity for the kids to give input on the design project or report? Is there going to be another opportunity to weigh in or an engagement window? Next slide. So there are ways to demonstrate this feedback, and this is, for me, one of my favorite examples. On the left is a physical model that a young person made in designing a feature that they wanted to see at a civic area park. And on the right is the actual treehouse that got built that stemmed from this idea from young people. I just had my 6-year-old daughter out on the site of this, and she played at this playground before, but I had missed previous opportunities to tell her that this treehouse is there because young people wanted it and asked for it. And she said, "Mommy, you're tricking me." And I said, "I'm not," and so it really is so empowering for them to know that the spaces that they are inhabiting have been influenced by other young people. It was so powerful. Next slide. So other ways to share ideas back are, again, by sharing out virtually. So you can always post to your website via social media, engage in a virtual campaign where you're asking for feedback via the social media platform, and then also sharing it back. So this is another set of tools that you are always welcome and encouraged to use. Next slide. And we are often engaged in, there we go, and we often have an opportunity to show many years later the feedback that youth have provided and how that influenced the overall vision or the result. And so this is another way of doing that, where you've got a graphic recording, an artist who is tasked with drawing out all of the ideas that have been heard. And then what's done in this case is, because a full range of ages was engaged to gather feedback, we then specifically came from young people. And you can see in this example that, the young people wanted bikes and pedestrians to be separated by a physical barrier. And, as that sometimes the youth have ideas that are not all that dissimilar from older adults. This is an example that we hear, a need or a desire that we hear from a lot of different aspects of our community who want that level of safety. So it's nice to be able to have a visual like this to share back ideas and be able to talk about the themes and relationships that emerge. Next slide. Another opportunity, another tool is sorry, waiting for the slide to catch up. My internet is a little slow. There we go. Word clouds. This is most effective when you are engaging online with technology, and there are pretty simple platforms where you can use a website to generate these. And then they also, as you compare children's responses to adult responses, you can see the relationship. So in this case, you see learning, you see space as being important to both. The difference is that in the children's responses, there's a lot more, they're looking for interactivity, as Nicole, you picked up a theme earlier around that. And there's, the energetic. So there are relationship similarities, and then there are also unique feelings and ideas that get shared. Next. All right, now this is an example of some work that we had done to engage, in particular, high school students. And we wanted to then share with them what we had done with the feedback that we heard. So we went and actually asked a different set of high school students, if you had been engaged in this process, how would you want to hear back about how your ideas were integrated? And they said, snail mail. We know no one ever gets an actual letter in the mail anymore. And we said, wait, really? That's how, and they said, yes, I would be so proud to see my name on an envelope show up in my mailbox and be able to show my mom or dad is what I did and have something to prove for it. And so that's what we did. We wrote a letter, and on the last page, we named every single person that was engaged in the process. We got feedback that they were so grateful. Not only mom or dad, here's what I did, but here's my name, and we were able to also show on one hand as part of the letter, here are the ideas that we heard. They were looking for more opportunities to engage with water. And then on the right is how that got translated into sort of more adult speak and the policy language that was informed by that. Next slide. So we also know that an important way to document the feedback is through reports. And the audience for these is typically adults. And I will say, having been on the client side of working with Growing Up Boulder in the past, I refer to these reports for many years after. And there are lots of ways of structuring them in such a way that it's clear the themes that are emerged and the pictures that demonstrate that their ideas. So the next couple of slides will kind of dig in a bit more to what is helpful to include in those reports. Some infographics are always really effective. This is showing what teenagers were looking for in their parks and themed by sort of how often those ideas emerged. So thrill seeking was a top theme, but even just to stand back and look at the graphic is really effective. So we like to suggest that there are opportunities to present the information in this regard. Next slide. And then there are also more traditional ways of showing a table, similar to the example that I showed you before in terms of the theme that emerged and how that got used. But then also to use the pictures themselves. So if you've worked with them in an art activity similar to the one we tried out earlier, show those pictures, put them in the reports, the PowerPoints, your website. It's really compelling evidence for others to look at. Next. Pie charts. If you've developed some kind of voting exercise where you're asking for preferences or what they're really looking for, this is another easy, quick way to demonstrate that feedback as well. Next slide. So the last principle we want to walk you through is really just to remind us that we really need to slow down sometimes once things are done and to celebrate and to reflect on what worked, what didn't, and if we're going to do this again in the future, how might we adapt? Really, now that I'm thinking about it, we should add the word celebrate to the front of this, because I will say sometimes, especially if it's your first attempt at this, it really is monumental to engage youth for the first time in your organization or your work. And then the period of time to really reflect on and evaluate what works. Simple exercise is sort of plus delta if you've not done that in the past. So, plus, you write just on a flip chart, a plus on one side and a triangle on another. And you ask participants to On the plus side, write the things that worked well. And on the delta triangle side, write the things that they might want to change in the future. And it's a really kind of very quick activity to gather that feedback. Next slide. Another mechanism that we use before and after our engagements is to ask the students, the young people, before we engage with them, to what extent they feel like they have a voice in local decision making. And here's an example of 39% of these young people felt like they had a voice before we engaged with them. After our engagement, that was 100%. And it's incredibly empowering to see what that means for young people, especially those who are marginalized or who have never had the experience of being asked. And one of the things that we've learned over time is that there's been an example for one project where, for logistical reasons, there were two groups being asked to develop ideas, and only one of them was able to share their ideas directly with the planners and local decision makers who were going to use their ideas, and the other group was not able to present them directly. And the group that was not able to present directly didn't show as marked an improvement on these scores. They did not feel as empowered. And so, we learned from that there are logistical challenges, that it is important for them to be able to share directly with the people who will use their ideas. All right, next slide. So just in summary, and again, because we'll send this back out, these are the 6 principles that we've really been honing and distilling over the many years that we've been working. And so you can refer back to these at any point after we meet today.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a refreshing break, maybe a snack or something to drink. Now we're going to take a little time to transition into talking about the current exhibition that's on view at the Clyfford Still Museum in Denver, Colorado, where Bailey and I both work. The exhibition is called Clyfford Still Art and the Young Mind. We wanted to give you kind of a sense of what the overlaps are and some of the principles that were just shared by Growing Up Boulder and the way that we put our exhibition together. So just to give you a little bit of background, in 2019, Bailey and I began discussing opportunities to engage young children, which is an audience that the museum hadn't previously worked with. That same year, the US Census Bureau reported that children under the age of 10 accounted for more than 10% of Denver County residents. This was a large percentage of the population that we just hadn't fully engaged. We decided to kick off this new initiative by planning an exhibition both with and for young children. Our vision for Clyfford Still Art and the Young Mind used what we knew about visual development and aesthetic preferences in young children as a jumping off point for gallery themes. Exciting research on young children's aesthetic preferences, notably the work of scholars Kathy Danko McGee and Michael J. Parsons, demonstrates that early learners have an appreciation for abstraction. We wanted to take this research a step further and home in on the individual perspectives of young children in our area, specifically in regard to the work of Clyfford Still. This project would be a new form of research and collaboration for CSM. Young children would serve as our co-curators for the show. But Bailey and I wondered, how could we authentically share power and expertise with our young co-curators? We didn't want audiences to leave the exhibition saying, oh, how cute, babies picked the art. Instead, we hoped that visitors would think critically about museum practice and leave the exhibition with a new understanding of young children as engaged community members capable of constructing the world around them. This aim, which draws inspiration from the philosophy of the Reggio Emilia approach, aligns with our belief that young children are expressive, central to their own learning, and rich, and rich with curiosity and new ideas. We know that there is so much for us to learn about art and museum experiences from children.
All right, so we had a lot of goals for this exhibition when we first started talking about it. But when we really boiled it down, these kind of three bulleted points that you see here kind of rose to the top. So our big idea for the exhibition was and remains even after the process of working with all of our co-curators, that young children are equal stakeholders and competent collaborators at CSM who bring valuable perspectives in reframing the collection, exhibitions, and the museum experience as a whole. The other visitor goals listed here were several that remained consistent for us throughout the journey. We started with several other goals, but found that in order to foster authentic collaboration with our co-curators, we really had to be open to our goals shifting over the course of the project's development based on the responses and input of our young co-curators. We even had one or two completely new goals that emerged as a result of working with young children that really became central to our interpretive strategy for the show. Slide. So let's talk a little bit about exhibition development process. As Nicole mentioned, we started by looking to existing research on what we know about visual development and aesthetic preferences of young children to develop the 5 gallery themes that were connected to the work of Clyfford Still in our collection. We landed on these themes here as the organizational foundation for the exhibition. And like Nicole said, while this was a critical jumping off point, we realized we had a ton of questions about how this research would translate when it comes to children in our own community. And we knew that those children would have the answers we were looking for. So we decided to take that research a step further and explore these individual perspectives of children in our area and work directly with them to hopefully learn more about our collection and potentially further the research in the field of aesthetic preference. So in trying to figure out how we would go about doing this, we looked for other examples and models for collaborating with children in the museum field. And we found a lot of case studies of museums working with children to curate shows, but we really couldn't find any examples of museums collaborating with very young pre-verbal children and babies to create an exhibition at an art museum. We hadn't yet been introduced to Mara and Darren and the wonderful work that Growing Up Boulder is doing. And so we quickly realized that we are going to need to go into this with an open mind and think of this entire project as one big experiment. So our first priority was to determine how we're going to get children involved. We wanted to make sure that they would be involved in every level of the exhibition planning from start to finish, everything from selecting the works on view and arranging them in the galleries to developing the gallery text, potential interactive experiences, audio tours, programming, and even marketing. Our goal was to have all of our co-curators have really important specific roles so that they would feel ownership in the show. Once we had, oh, sorry, you can go back one. Thanks, Kenda. Once we had identified our partner schools, which I think Nicole will touch on in a minute, we broke the exhibition planning process into these big chunks and assigned timelines to each one. We presented the gallery themes, planning phases, and their associated timelines to our partner schools so that they could assess what worked best for their own schedules, the ages of kids that they were teaching, and curricula. In the end, each classroom had assignments for specific elements in the exhibition's development and associated deliverables and timelines. Next slide.
So we started the whole exhibition development process with infant co-curators. So our infants were ages 6 months old to 18 months old, who we tasked with selecting works for our high contrast gallery, the first gallery in the show. One of the first stages of visual development is infants' ability to distinguish between black, white, and red. And one of the first questions we often got when starting to talk about this exhibition is, but what do you mean you co-curated with infants? Well, I wanted to tell a little background of how that worked. And then we have a little video we'd like to share so you can sort of see for yourself. We worked closely with the infant teachers that we were collaborating with to design activities where we could gather the preferences of infants in their classrooms. Bailey and I chose 25 super high contrast, abstract black, white, and red paintings from the collection for the children to select from, and sent the reproductions of those works to the infant classrooms that we partnered with. Again, this was all happening during COVID. Sorry, I didn't mention that. This was at the very beginning of the pandemic. So this was all us figuring out how to do this remotely. So we sent the reproductions to the classroom. Bailey and I joined the classroom via Zoom and watched as the teachers held up 2 different reproductions at a time. And Bailey and I and some of our staff at the museum helped us track the preferences. So once we had all of the preferences, we tallied them up from all the different classrooms that we worked with, and the highest rated paintings are now on display in the exhibition. All but 2 of the works they selected have never been on view before. So our young co-curators gave us a new perspective on these works of art. Throughout the process, we were excited to see how infants' earliest expressions of visual preference would translate when it comes to Still's high contrast works. There was definitely a moment where we were like, is this going to work? We noted pointing, verbalizations, facial expressions, visual tracking, and other bodily movements that took place in response to the reproductions. And finally, here is a quick video clip to give you an example of one of the amazing moments we witnessed. This is Ava, 15 months old, selecting artwork for the high contrast gallery. It looks like, oh, maybe we're gonna try to do sound, but if we can't get the sound, I'm happy to narrate whatever works.
What do you think, Ava? Which picture did you like? What do you like?
Oh,
what do you think? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
You like that one?
That video has really helped us garner support for this exhibition, I should say. This is one of the unexpected benefits of working during these restrictions during the pandemic is that we were documenting and recording all of these sessions with our co-curators. And now this is something that we can share to help explain the work, because immediately, and I hope that you felt this way too, people are seeing that with this pre-verbal co-curator, her preferences were still very clear. When prompted, you know, are you sure you like this one and not this other one? You know, she returned to it with a smile and a point. And so that was really exciting to see throughout the process. This is actually an image of an interactive activity that resulted from one of our partnerships with our schools and the galleries of the exhibition. So what we're looking at right now is 3 connected light boxes that were custom built and are installed on the floor with document cameras attached, which is sending the feed to projectors mounted on the wall. So what you're seeing on the wall is these white painted rectangles where the works that children and adults are creating are being projected on the wall, the same walls that Clyfford Still's art is being displayed and at about the same scale in some spaces. This exhibition has been open for just over a month, and this installation has definitely been a highlight for a lot of people. We partnered with Boulder Journey School pre-kindergarten students to experiment with light and color to help plan this gallery's interactive activity. Teachers from BJS set up provocations in their theater space and introduced their students to the space. After that, our young co-curators took over from there. We were able to converse with and observe the children interacting with light and shadow, building, painting, and immersing themselves in colored light, which was a favorite activity of the group. And this resulting installation was directly informed by this process and the debrief conversations that we were able to have with the teachers at the school. And then on the next slide, there were several schools, because as I said, we started working during the pandemic. There were several schools we were able to visit with multiple times, whether that was online or eventually in person, which was a really great experience. We worked with one of our partners, the Center for Talent Development, over Zoom, which is a school in our neighborhood. And then as COVID restrictions started to lift, they were able to make a trip to the museum. Our first online visits with CTD students was to talk about the interpretations of works of art in a gallery themed around color, arranged in a rainbow-like Roy G. Biv display. We talked about how different colors made them feel, often debunking socially constructed ideas about certain colors being associated with specific emotions or genders, and memorably, how different paintings might sound if they could make a sound. In response to a dark purple painting, one co-curator proclaimed, "It sounds like a swamp monster," and then proceeded to make a sound I can only describe as something between a deep gurgle and a growl. It was pretty incredible and gave us a new way to see these paintings through the eyes of the children we were working with. Later on in the process, CTD was able to visit the museum. This image is from that visit. Having worked exclusively with us over Zoom, this group was overwhelmed at seeing the scale of the paintings and the building in person. Just, you know, as Darren was mentioning earlier, being at the actual site has such a huge impact. We got loads of new questions from this group that hadn't previously been raised. Like, did Clifford Still build this building? And how much paint does it take to make these huge paintings? It was a great reminder of the power of being in the space with the works when engaging our collaborators. Okay, so now that you have kind of a quick general overview of the project and a little bit about the process, we wanted to connect it back to the 6 principles for youth engagement that Growing Up Boulder walked us through, so you can see how that played out in a real world scenario. The first one, start with equity. When we kicked off this project, our first big decision was who we wanted to work with, who we wanted to bring into this conversation. We knew we wanted to work with young children from birth to age 8, but how could we ensure a diverse representation of children who would become our co-curators for the project? We decided to work with schools from across the Front Range in Colorado, which is sort of our larger region. And we reached out to some elementary schools that we had existing relationships with and sought out new relationships, looking to create a diverse group of school, rural, urban, in our neighborhood and as far flung as Fort Collins. We worked with schools who have bilingual student populations, who are part of Head Start or Title I programs, and students with disabilities.
All right, next slide. So principle 2, meet young people where they are. This one was tricky, obviously, at the beginning because of COVID. And most of the planning process did take place during the pandemic. So rather than being able to visit all the classrooms in person, we conducted many of our collaborative sessions via Zoom. The inability to engage directly with the children during the project object selection and arrangement phases limited our potential for unmediated relationships with our co-curators who helped with this part of the project. While we were super bummed that this was not, and it's not how we envisioned conducting our research when we began thinking about the show, meeting with our young co-curators online also made it possible for us to collaborate with schools outside of Denver, like Nicole mentioned, and ultimately provided a larger and more diverse sample. It also allowed for us to create a solid foundation with some of our co-curators in Denver that we were able ultimately to bring into the space during later phases of the project.
This process was all about asset-based engagement. We knew that kids were going to be the ones really shaping this exhibition, and we really wanted to hear from their unique perspectives. So we were excited about considering our young co-curators' lived experiences, their skills and interests, and about their cultures and languages. Interpreting the work of Clyfford Still is all about the children's perspectives. There are no set meanings of Still's work to learn, just your own creative interpretations to discover and share. And these are some actual examples from our co-curators. And I should also say, and we'll get to this a little bit deeper later, but you'll see a lot of these quotes on the walls and in our audio experience when you're in the exhibition as well.
So Principle 4 states that importance of using a variety of methods to engage a variety of learners, partially out of necessity and partially stemming from our interest in finding new ways to share curatorial authority with young collaborators, as this was the first time that CSM has ever collaborated with a community in the on an exhibition. We felt that it was really important for us to think critically about how we could experiment with lots of and various approaches to collaboration during this development process. This flexibility and openness to experimenting with a wide variety of data gathering methods and activities allowed for participation of children of all ages and from all types of schools across the Front Range. In some cases, we worked over Zoom and within our virtual gallery software, which is what you see here. These students on the right shown in the image are a selection of, I think this particular activity had more than 80 participants that were kind of giving feedback and helping us place these construction paper pastel works by Still on this gallery wall in a pattern. And in others, we worked with partner schools to provocate spaces, like Nicole mentioned with the interactive activity at Boulder Journey School, just so we could observe from afar how they interacted with objects within the space to inform our design. We also engaged Center for Talent Development in our space. Nicole showed a picture of that earlier, and used methods, movement-based methods and inquiry about, how paintings make them feel. Can you make the shapes with your body? And all of those informed the interpretation that we paired with the works in the exhibition.
Principle 5, be transparent about process and outcomes. This is a really fun principle, I think, in this exhibition. There's many ways that we shared our process with visitors to the exhibition and the outcomes. Pictured here, you can see a few examples of how we try to tackle this in a really intentional way. So you see 2 video screens featuring excerpts of our work with our co-curators. So one is on view in the first gallery of the exhibition and shows excerpts of our infant co-curators making selections. And the second one is in our interactive art making space. And that features highlights from our work with all of our co-curators. So you get kind of a sense of the participation at the 8 different schools that we worked with, the different ages, the kinds of activities that they were doing. And yes, we did get releases from all of these families, which was really helpful to have to be able to share this great work. The wall text that you see is one of our partner spotlights. Each gallery in the exhibition has one of these vinyl labels at the start highlighting which schools and grades worked on that specific gallery. But I also just want to call out that the entire exhibition highlights the outcome of the children's contributions. We'll just flip through a few installation views so you can see what we mean. This is the first gallery that was curated by our infant co-curators, the High Contrast Gallery. This next gallery is themed around pattern, and the objects were selected by 3- and 4-year-olds, and the actual design of the wall of the pattern itself was designed by elementary students. This gallery is themed around the idea of the world around us. So this is all representational artwork. And we're looking at a wall that's all planes, trains, and automobiles. That was curated with elementary school students and designed. This is just an example of one of our labels. All of the wall text in the exhibition starts with a quote from one of our co-curators. And so you see the voices of children scattered throughout the exhibition. This is an image of our audio experience, which includes audio in English and Spanish and video on Vimeo on American Sign Language. And visitors can access all of these on their own smart device via the QR codes on display. And the image you're seeing here is one of our co-curators, Lydia, who is serves as one of the hosts of the English version of the audio guide. All of these guides are completely led by our children co-curators. And here's one more image. One of the things that we were playing with in the exhibition was how to show our pre-readers, give them kind of a sense of the gallery theme. And this is an image from the World Around Us gallery, where in addition to having the text in English and Spanish, we also have the mirror as sort of a representation of the theme of that gallery. And of course, a young child enjoying seeing herself literally reflected in the exhibition.
Okay, so it's time for our third kind of activity pause. We wanted to, now that we've kind of shared ways that we've documented in Clyfford Still Art in the Young Mind youth voice and how they engaged with us over the process, we'd love to kind of brainstorm and have you think about what other forms of documentation you see yourself using in your own work. So we put some examples of ways that this can be done on the right in bullets, and then highlighted in blue those that Nicole and I utilized in this exhibition. So if you want to just either unmute yourself and share or type in the chat, I'd love to kind of see what other ideas we can come up with.
A collaborative art installation in my museum's children gallery. I love that, Jessica. And are you imagining that the children are collaborating together? Yeah. I have to say it was a really joyful project to work on.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, that was one of the emergent themes that we hadn't really planned on highlighting so much at the beginning of this project. And then over the course of the development, rose to the top, joy as a whole. And it just became such a through line for the exhibition. And I'm not sure if it had anything to do probably with the fact that we were doing so much of it during the pandemic, but these collaborative sessions were just the highlight of Nicole and I's week, and always looked forward to them. Oh, I love that, along the nature trails. Yes. Wow. I was thinking as we were working on this, Nicole, just some other way, like a podcast would be so fun, like some sort of, and we got an audio tour, and those weren't listed on this bulleted list, but those are also recordings. That's an obvious way to document and share contributions.
I think another potential interesting thing that's come up too is the press has been interested in interviewing some of our co-curators. So someone from Denverite, a local paper in Denver, actually interviewed Lydia for a piece that they did on the exhibition, which also seems like a great document of the process in the show as well.
Social media posts, yep, just reading these.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this last principle is all about reflecting and evaluating and adapting future projects based on your own experiences. And I think for the first time ever with an exhibition at the Clyfford Still Museum, we've kind of built in several opportunities for reflection. Some of them were intentional and some were not, but it's been incredibly helpful. And I've learned so much in just allowing myself that, and Nicole, like that time to think and talk about what we learned, what didn't work, what did. We deliberately did plan for an outside evaluator to help us understand how successful the exhibition is at achieving some of our biggest goals, which will be taking place over the course of the exhibition this summer. But we've also been fortunate enough to have several writing and presentation opportunities like this, which have forced us to make dedicated time to synthesize our thoughts on the process and reflect on how we can apply these lessons in the future.
Just some quick observations about the process that we'd like to share for folks who are interested in embarking on this kind of work. We found that paying honoraria to our partner teachers really demonstrated that we value their time and recognize their contributions. Committing to the ongoing collaboration was really important for us. We returned to classrooms multiple times with some of our partners, which resulted in what felt like a deepened shared understanding of exhibition development practices. Posing multiple types of provocations about the works was essential. With some groups, the classic "what's going on in this picture" did not elicit as many responses as "how would you describe this painting to someone who couldn't see it?" Or "if this painting could make a sound, what would it sound like?" Young Mind opened the door for us to rethink CSM's policies and the way we communicate with visitors to become more family friendly. Our focus on very young visitors through this exhibition really sparked an institutional culture shift. And finally, the children's responses to Clyfford Still's work were joyful. We witnessed research on aesthetic preference come to life during our school visits, seeing the children's eyes light up at brightly colored abstractions and hearing them confidently share their interpretations. Just as one example, a 3-year-old responded to an oil pastel drawing on construction paper work featuring a single white vertical line flanked by flurries of green, blue, and black marks by stating, "This drawing is a tunnel for a hungry monster." Their observations reminded us of the pure joy found in art, a simple yet profound factor to value in our everyday work.
And it also presented some challenges that we'd love to also share. So the first, Nicole hinted at this institutional culture shift. That exposed some problematic perceptions about young children, like the idea, won't little kids touch the paintings, and art museums aren't places for young children. So we found ourselves wanting to not only shift our visitors' perspectives about children being capable collaborators, but also our internal staff and people that we work with on a daily basis. So it also showed some limitations of our building that we really can't help. We don't have an appropriate nursing space for some of our displays are not at an accessible height for small children or people in wheelchairs. And while Young Mind has been a fitting impetus to address some of these barriers, they're too big for 1 or 2 staff members to dismantle without cross-departmental commitment and support. COVID-19 was obviously a roadblock, accounting for, we also found that, thinking so much about children in this exhibit, it was tricky for us to also keep in mind the vast majority of our visitors who are adults. And so we tried to address this by establishing parallel exhibition through lines and visitor goals for our adult audiences, and a hierarchical kind of gallery interpretation strategy that accounted for our pre-readers, early readers, and adults, and also layered wall text to inform adult audiences about the visual development process and kind of the science behind what's happening to add another level of interest there. And then lastly, about halfway through our planning process, we realized that we faced a pretty big conceptual barrier when explaining the project to our collaborators and people we were interested in working with. And Nicole touched on that a little bit earlier with the video of Ava. No one really understood what we were doing or how it could really be possible. but we found that showing these recorded clips of the process was essential to bridge that gap and help people understand. And it became a really vital piece of how we communicated about this show. So highly recommend recordings. So what's next? Internally, we've really only just begun thinking about what worked and what didn't, and what is working and what is not working. We've started a list of all the various changes that we've made, not only to our exhibition spaces, but also to the museum as a whole, based on this exhibition. And we're starting to try to think about those changes' impact on staff and also our visitors in order to figure out what we want to carry forward next.
Now that the exhibition is open, we're excited to bring young children in really intentional ways. So we've launched some new programs for our very youngest visitors, infants. Art Crawl is designed for infants birth through 14 months. And the program started last month as a monthly program. I think we've probably sold out the first 3 Saturday sessions of this program, which is really exciting and really, I think, speaks to the need of early childhood programming in museums. And we're also working with trainer evaluation based here in Denver and CU Denver to evaluate how we met the goals of the exhibition. And this evaluation, of course, will include the voices of young children. And we're hoping to share more of this process with the field to encourage as many other institutions to pursue this kind of work as possible, because it has brought us, our other CSM colleagues, and now our audiences so much joy. We will be presenting at AAM in May with other colleagues from across the country who have prioritized youth engagement in their own museum work, and hope that that is just the beginning. And sorry, I used an acronym. It's American Alliance of Museums that we'll be presenting at.
Okay, well, we would love to, Nicole and Bailey, that was just wonderful. And even though Darren and I got to visit the museum yesterday, I still could hear this story hundreds of times because I find it so interesting. So we wanted to open this up to you, the audience, to find out what questions or discussion points you might have. So feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute yourself and just say your question.
I'm really curious about your explorations in sound, and just hearing a few more of those with kids.
Did you say explorations in sound? I just want to make sure I heard it correctly.
Yes.
Okay. Nicole or Bailey?
Do you just mean through our audio experience? Is that what you're implying?
Yes, and I see a lot of like physical mediums, but I'm really curious, like in our museum, it's the Oklahoma Pop Culture Museum. We're discussing a floor that's all about Oklahoma contributions to music around the world. And so we've got a lot of interactive exhibit ideas that we're playing around with. We're trying to make the museum as inclusive as possible. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm sure I can take a lot of what you've explained to us today and could just put it over to sound, but just curious if you've had any specific sound related exhibits that you've worked on with kids. I really like the idea of what painting this might, or what sound this painting might make and things like that. I'm curious if you've started with sound and kind of gone from there.
This is the first exhibition that we've worked with children on. And so that was really kind of our first foray into recording some of those reactions to the paintings and the sounds that they make. And the way that we translated that into an audio experience is that we looked back at all of our recordings of working with the children in the various classrooms and kind of pulled out big through lines and themes for each of the spaces. And then kind of Nicole and I scripted some, some through line, a script that would carry visitors through and make it an enjoyable experience. And then we worked with another classroom to record those scripted parts. I think that we have a lot of ideas, and we're excited to kind of work more with sound in some upcoming exhibitions. But for what we've done so far, this audio experience was really kind of our first collaborative sound based experience.
And Colby, thanks for that question. I think also we're planning on sending out this presentation to all of the folks who registered for this, but we could also include links to our audio and ASL experiences as well.
And I'll just say, as a visitor yesterday to the museum, I tried listening to the recordings, and especially in Spanish, which is one of my second languages, or other languages. It actually was a great opportunity for me to be able to understand it, because it was kids talking. And so it actually enriched my own experience, because it was not at an academic level that I couldn't understand in another language. So that was an added plus. That was a great question, Colby. Are there other questions from people about the process or the product?
A question. So you said that you had given honorariums to the teachers. Was there any kind of connection between the museum and the families of the co-curators? Like, were they invited to any kind of event, or do they have, was there some sort of reciprocity on the family end as well?
That's a great question. We have actually a school partner and family opening celebration in May. So we're planning a big event where we're hoping to bring all the families. They'll have free admission to the museum to come see the work. We'll have all kinds of different art making activities, a photo booth, all kinds of fun ways for families to engage and also see the work of their children in the exhibition. We also, through our school programs division, we're getting field trip requests from the schools who served as partner schools and co-curators. So some of the co-curators will be coming on the school visits, which we are working to customize what those visits look like for our co-curators, in addition to the big family opening celebration.
And Nicole, that's actually a great point about too, how the children then become helpful in terms of publicity, of getting the word out there through word of mouth and through the families talking about this to their friends and relatives. So people who might not have otherwise been exposed to the museum may start coming because they've heard about this from someone very close to them. And that really makes a big difference. It was also very inclusive. I just have to add, all of the exhibits at the Clyfford Still Museum right now are bilingual, English and Spanish, with Spanish having as much prominence as English. And I think that says a lot when you're really talking about inclusion. It really matters, and it was very visible.
I just dropped the link. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to your point, Mara, we actually have already seen that. I mean, some of our co-curators, our Spanish-speaking co-curators have brought their families to the museum who had never been to our museum before, and we're so excited to see the contributions of their child, Cassandra. I think, yeah, you would recognize that her wall, she kind of is featured with some of her amazing contributions to the show. And so, yeah, we've already seen kind of that word of mouth spreading, and it's been really exciting.
Any last burning questions? This is the last chance. And again, thank you. If you wouldn't mind, Kenda, going on to the next two slides, we have some resources available for you. And again, you don't have to furiously write these down. These will both be provided to you. So these are resources here from Growing Up Boulder, both the TED Talk I did, as well as there's a book that we've co-written. So you can actually take a lot of these principles, and it has the how-to instructions. It has both the philosophy, but also like, how do you do it in your own community? So that's for you from our site and then from the Clyfford Still Museum. Next slide, please. There are some resources there as well. And Nicole and Bailey wrote a wonderful article that really documents this well. And I know they're working on future articles as well.